Hey there, it's John here, and welcome to this week's book club. I'm in my usual cafe, but a different seat, and it's just been a really delightful morning. I actually had an incredible meditation group last night as well, so I'm just feeling very, very blessed at the moment. So, yeah, and after the kind of the trickiness, perhaps, of kind of last week's material, the John Didion piece that we were looking at. This week I wanted to kind of bring something that was so very, very different, and one of the things I'm trying to do with sharing stories and poems and non-fiction and other forms of writing is in a way to kind of like read around the world a little bit, to kind of leave the kind of the single encompassing what seems to be predominant narrative of literature that we've been exposed to over the last however long, and to kind of open that up into a kind of a much larger context of things. So it's interesting today that we looked at two American native writers, indigenous American writers, and a very, very big writer and a very, very big poet. Both write hugely important work. So the story we looked at was by Sherman Alexie, who is a Spokane, Coeur d'Alene American, or indigenous American, as he would refer to himself. And he grew up in on the Spokane Indian Reservation in Seattle, and I think he still lives in Seattle now. And his story, which is the lead story from one of his collections, is called "The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven." And what can I say about this story? It was just one person absolutely hated it. And then everybody else really, really loved it, including myself. And I'm not discounting somebody not liking the story. We meet our character whose name we don't get to know, and he comes across as a drunken and kind of angry, hurt person. And then the story kind of broadly leads us on a kind of redemptive path that he kind of goes through, because life just keeps presenting him with things, and he's blessed to not be somehow completely crushed by his circumstance and his past and the things that have happened to so many people. And there's some little element of grace kind of keeps leading him forward, and it's just such a beautifully written, simple, easy to read piece that kind of weaves and circles around certain little themes and little motifs that he places in. It's absolutely beautiful. And things that people particularly liked about it was the great naturalness of the dialogue. The characters are alive. Hemingway, he reminds me of Hemingway very much in some ways. Hemingway famously said that we should don't write characters, he said, write real people, because characters are caricatures, and that's true. And Alexie here presents us with real people, and we get to kind of see our character's main relationship and the kind of the problems within that relationship, and yet the actual love that's genuinely there underneath. Let me just read you a little tiny bit. Some nights she fought so bad that I would just get in my car and drive all night. Only stop to fill up on gas. In fact, I worked the graveyard shift to spend as much time away from her as possible. But I learnt all about Seattle that way, driving its back ways and dirty alleys. Sometimes, though, I would forget where I was and get lost. I'd drive for hours, searching for something familiar. Seems like I'd spent my whole life that way, looking for anything I recognised. Once, I ended up in a nice residential neighbourhood, and somebody must have been worried because the police showed up and pulled me over. "What are you doing here?" the police officer asked me as he looked over my licence and registration. "I'm lost." "Well, where are you supposed to be?" he asked me, and I knew there were plenty of places I wanted to be, but none where I was supposed to be. "I got in a fight with my girlfriend," I said. "I was just driving around, blowing off steam, you know." "Well, you should be more careful where you drive," the officer said. "You're making people nervous. You don't fit the profile of the neighbourhood." I wanted to tell him that I didn't really fit the profile of the country, but I knew it would just get me into trouble. So there you have it. And just these details of driving all night and being pulled over by the police and sort of reconnecting with the past, and just, I don't know, it's just delicious. This is somebody I would read again. I've not read him before. I've known about his name for many, many years. I think he initially started out as a poet, and a friend used to tell me about him, that I should have a look at him because I was sort of starting to write poetry at the same time. We're quite similar in age, Sherman Alexie and myself, and he was kind of coming through at the same time I was beginning to write. And a friend of mine kept saying, "No, you have to see this guy, you have to read this guy," and I never did. So this is my first kind of real exposure to him. And then for our poet, because I just want to kind of leave you to kind of explore that, we looked at, as I say, another Indigenous American, another Native American, Joy Harjo, and she's from the Creek Nation. She was born in Tulsa, and her work kind of draws on a lot of kind of history and First Nation storytelling, a very strong kind of feminist element and social justice element to her writing, whereas Sherman Alexie just shows us a story, and we kind of know for ourselves. Joy Harjo is a little more kind of heart on her sleeve, I suppose, but this poem, which is called Eagle Poem, which was the first poem I came across of hers, and then I've kind of fallen in love with the breadth of her work over the last couple of years. This poem was just loved by everybody. This is Eagle Poem. Eagle Poem by Joy Harjo. To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know, except in moments steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle, that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion, like eagle rounding out the morning inside us. We pray that it will be done in beauty. In beauty. How about that? The circles, the eagle, the musicality of this piece, the connection to our breath with it. We actually found it very hard to talk about because it was so mesmerizing and so inviting in. I admit that I have chosen poems for the group that are inviting. I'm a bit tired of people being put off poetry by this kind of almost like destructive complexity, which kind of shows a kind of wrong-headed intellectualism that runs through sort of so much poetry sometimes, that kind of, you know, I just want people to access poetry and then find their own way, you know. And like Mary Oliver, like Sharon Olds, there's such a tradition here. I can see Whitman here, I can see Blake, and, you know, I don't know, it was just such a hard poem to talk about, so we kind of pretty much sat in kind of like a stunned silence after it, really, and kind of, you know, all we could kind of say is, yes, the musicality is fantastic, and you know, look how it goes in a circle, you know, look how the circles are moved in it. And then as we kind of just sat with it a little longer, we realised that actually to write something that seems so whole and so complete and so simple, it's so accessible in the way that this is really hard work, and that the work behind this must have been quite enormous. The naturalness of voice, the same with Sherman Alexie, that naturalness of voice, that's real work to get to that sort of stuff. And when people are kind of complex and difficult and you can't get in there, maybe that's actually laziness, you know. One thing that I did mention when I was doing my literature masters quite a few years back, my professor, one of my professors, said something to me which has always stayed with me, and I mentioned it to the group today, and that's that entering into any text is pretty much like entering into a dream. And if the writer's done their job well, it's got nothing to do with simplicity or complexity, but if the writer has done their job well, then it's as if we are kind of held in that dream. If the writer hasn't done their job well, you'll find as a reader yourself kind of thrown out of the dream, and you have to kind of work your way back in. And this isn't about kind of writing lowest common denominator simple stuff. It's that the writer does need to be able to hold you within the dream of the piece. And be this an essay, be this a poem, be this a short story, or a piece of non-fiction, you need to feel that you've kind of fully entered into it. And so that's a large part of the writer's job. And all I can say is that both Sherman Alexie and Joy Harjo are both wonderfully capable at holding us and keeping us within the world that they want us to enter into. So I hope you've enjoyed this short video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up or a like, depending on which medium you're seeing this. Please subscribe to this channel if you're on YouTube, because it's really lovely seeing the numbers going up, and we're reaching more people now, which is fantastic. So let's keep kind of spreading the love and the interesting stuff around. And if you've got any comments about these, if you read these pieces and you're moved by them, whether you like them or don't like them, then post a comment down below. And don't just say I like it or I don't like it, because that's kind of meeting it at only a very surface sort of level. Tell us why you didn't like it. Tell us why you did like it. Tell us what's beautiful about it for you. Tell us about what's moving about it for you, you know. One last word on the Joy Harjo piece. We all felt that it would make an amazing funeral poem. And I know that might sound macabre, but actually, you know, poetry and good literature, when people are born, when people are getting married, when people die, this is when we need stories. This is when we need our storytellers and our poets. The ordinary, real, deep, human, beautiful things, you know, and expressions of our life. That's when literature is really the most, you know, necessary. So let me leave you with that, and have a beautiful, beautiful day. Take care.